the border numbers are, okay, what word do we use anymore? Amazing, staggering, horrific. What word do you want me to use? The country's being invaded and overrun. There's not another way to put it. Over 6 million encounters in just 3 years of a Biden presidency. And it chaps me to no end to listen to the losers in the GOP describe what's happening on the border as a mistake, or Joe Biden stumbles, or it's a failure at the border. You only have that many illegals pouring into your country if it's intentional. They didn't trip and fall and allow illegals into the country. They want them here. Joining me now, someone who knows a lot more about this than I do, Mark Krikorian, of course, of the great Center for Immigration Studies. Mark, I don't know what it is. I don't know why the right continues to use this language when they discuss what Joe Biden and the Democrats do. They failed, they stumbled. This is what they want. That's why it's open.
Yeah, I actually, my take's a little bit different. You're right that the idea that this is somehow a mistake, or that they're not doing a good enough job, that's ludicrous. I think what's driving this, though, is partly among some people what you're suggesting, that they actually want this flood of people. I actually think for the most part, what's driving this is an ideological commitment to open borders. In other words, they don't believe that the American people have the right to say no. So that if the numbers didn't go up, but they still let everybody in, they would be okay with that for the most part. What they don't believe that we as the people have the right to do is say no to people who are walking up to the border and coming up with some kind of story. That's, in fact, if anything, that's even worse, because that reflects a rejection of the very concept of immigration law. And I'm afraid those are the kind of people who are running immigration policy in this administration.
Okay, that's fascinating, and you're probably correct on that. Expand on that for me, Mark. Why would they not think we have the right to say no? Even filthy commie countries throughout history have secured their own borders, but we can't? What?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's two things. Part of it is let's face it, they just don't like America very much. And so we kind of deserve it. It's that sort of thing. That, we've interfered in the world, and so anybody from Central America who wants to move here gets to, because the United Fruit Company 100 years ago interfered in their business. It's that kind of thing, but it goes even beyond that, I think, in that these people don't see national borders in general as legitimate. They don't think Europe has the right to keep people out. They don't think Australia or Israel have the right to keep people out. The issue, of course, is that those are the only countries that people want to go to. If people were flocking to go to Cuba, they might still be opposed to measures to keep them out. Although, let's try that and see what happens. But as it happens, the countries people want to go to are democratic, stable countries, obviously, because the economies are better, the governments are better, there's public order. And those are the very places that these people don't think have the right to keep anybody out. It's like reparations almost through immigration. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. Let's talk about the terror aspect of this, Mark, because I got to be honest with you. I think a bunch of military-age men crossing the border, no matter what, is a problem. But if I was a hostile foreign power, whether it's a terrorist organization or communist China, and I thought I could get 1,000 trained men into America, I could probably do quite a bit of damage, and that's with 1,000. We have terrorists showing up at our border, and those are the ones we're catching.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I don't think that there's a bunch of Hamas guys in Tijuana waiting to rush over the border and kill people. But there's no question that this vulnerability, this ease of getting people into the country, is going to be a temptation that's irresistible to places, whether it's terrorist organizations, whether it's the Chinese communists, whether it's the Russian FSB or the Cubans or whoever, the Iranians. Why wouldn't they use this as a way of getting people into the country? And, we're not going to know what happened until after it happens. This is why you have border security, so you sort of reduce the likelihood of these kind of problems happening. You have it at the borders, you have it at the airports, you have it at the visa offices. In other words, you have to have border security. It needs to be indivisible, as it were. In other words, across the board, because otherwise, wherever the weak point is, that's where both bad guys and just regular illegal aliens are going to try to get in.
Mark, states and in fact individuals feel extremely helpless right now who want this stopped. And in many ways, they are, aren't they? After all, it is the federal government's authority. It's the federal government's business to secure the border. If your federal government is full of a bunch of dirty commies who don't want to secure the border, you're pretty much up the creek, aren't you?
For a while, but I mean, that's what elections are for. That's what impeachments are for. That's what state governments, to a degree, are for, because Texas can't stop this immigration disaster on its own, but they have been taking steps to try to minimize the problems for Texas. And so in your own state, you can potentially do something. Of course, it depends on which state. California is not going to do anything, but a lot of states can do certain things to make their states less appealing to illegal immigrants, so that even if the feds wave in millions of illegal immigrants across the border, you can do something in your community, in your state, to convince them to go to Chicago and New York instead of where you live.
Speaking of which, Greg Abbott, he's making Eric Adams' life miserable in New York City. Well, here it is.
In recent weeks, we've seen migrants arriving more and more quickly. Instead of the 2,400 people in a week that we had previously, we're now getting nearly 4,000 a week. These mayors, my colleagues across America, are doing the best they can, but it's clear that all of these cities are overwhelmed.
Mark, is this going to be an effective strategy in the long run? Don't get me wrong, I love making these sanctuary cities actually experience illegal immigration the way they claim to love. But you hear Eric Adams chirping at Joe Biden, Kathy Hochul's asking for more money. Is this maybe a path forward?
It definitely helps. It's not the solution, but there's no question that Greg Abbott has changed the national discussion on this. And that's what the real benefit of this is. It's not just that Texas sent some illegal immigrants to New York. In fact, most of the illegal immigrants going to New York aren't even being bused there by Texas. They're getting there on their own. But it has changed the discussion, and it's not going to change the mind of people on the hard left who don't believe America has a right to exist, let alone keep illegal aliens out. But it may well have an influence on a lot of people in the middle who may be turned off by some of Trump's, over-the-top boorishness, but it's getting through to them that there's real problem at the border. So I would say, yes, what Abbott and others have been doing in sending illegal immigrants to New York and Chicago and elsewhere has paid dividends more really than I ever expected when that started.